What is the difference between refugees and asylum seekers?
Well, essentially, an asylum seeker really is a refugee in waiting. That's how I look at it. In order to become a refugee, you have to first be an asylum seeker, so you had to have sought or claimed asylum. And during the time that your asylum application has been considered, you're an asylum seeker, and hopefully at the end of that, if you meet the conventions 1951, then you will become a refugee.
What qualifies a person to be recognised as a refugee in the law? And if we asked ordinary people in the street or in the pub what they thought a refugee was, people might say it's somebody who's escaped danger, who's left because there's some kind of threat to them. And well, that's part of it. But as the students discover, not everybody who flees danger will be recognised as being a refugee in a legal sense. There can be issues of proof. There are questions about whether the type of harm that somebody would face will be recognised as a form of persecution. And also, fleeing danger by itself and crossing a border to another country doesn't make somebody a refugee unless that danger would be individually targeted at the person, for example, because of their political or religious beliefs. So not everyone who flees genuine danger will be recognised as a refugee, and that's often a surprise. So somebody who's applied for asylum is simply somebody who's, well, as the word suggests, made an application to be recognised as a refugee, and who therefore may be recognised in the future or not. How do we know if somebody is really a refugee? Well, there's a United Nations definition that's used in the UK and many other countries, which has a number of different elements. And I'll simplify it, of course, for our conversation. They would have to show not only that they're afraid or that they believe that they'd be harmed if they're returned, but there's some kind of tangible evidence to support their claim. A person would need to show that they would face a risk of serious harm and that the country they've come from would not protect them from that serious harm. And only certain kinds or levels of harm will be recognised. And as I suggested earlier, they would have to show that the harm they would face would not simply be, as it were, a generalised risk. So, for example, if I'm fleeing a country which is in civil war, my home might have been destroyed, a member of my family might have been killed because maybe I live near a front line in that conflict. But if the risks that I face are not individually targeted to me, then I wouldn't necessarily be recognised as a refugee.
Over the past 5 years or so, the number of people who've been claiming asylum in the UK has been falling. Why is this?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that actually it's much harder to claim asylum in this country and much harder to. I don't think that it's sort of it's born out of that there aren't still numbers of people that are being persecuted, around the world and whatever, because there are, and we know that. But it is because it is actually harder to get into this country. Which then sort of begs the question that, under the UN Convention of 1951, Britain has an obligation to that, and actually should be encouraging and allowing people to come here and claim asylum. But so actually, it's harder to get here to claim asylum, number one. And then when you actually do get here, the system is of a nature that really discourages, and I know some people have had very sort of negative experiences, and they felt that they were, at times it can feel like, well, the attitude is, okay, we don't believe you, you prove to us that you're telling the truth, rather than we're here to listen and then we'll make a decision. And also in the world at the moment, there are, as I said, still large numbers of people that are fleeing from a variety of issues throughout the world, but rather than coming maybe to Britain, is that or coming to Europe, that actually they go to their neighbouring countries. So there are huge refugee camps, like in parts of Africa, like in Kenya, like in Syria. There's a lot of people there from Iraq and Iran. So the numbers are still great. It's just for a variety of reasons. Maybe they're not making it as far as Britain anymore. Well, because potentially they haven't got the finances or the money to actually, because like it or loathe it, whether, immigration officials, UKBA, or, governments like in Europe and, the Americas like it, the asylum system in some ways is controlled by traffickers. And if you haven't got the money to actually pay a trafficker to get you out, and that doesn't take away from the fact that you're actually being persecuted in your own country, because you can be, but actually the only way that you can get out of that country is that you have to pay somebody a large sum of money. Some people don't have that. And I know that people are trafficked. I mean, their rights to claim asylum and the merits in their case are every bit as great as somebody that, made it on their own steam. So it shouldn't take away from that. So lack of finances, and also, lack of knowledge of people, really about it. I know it's hard to believe, but, there may be some people actually that aren't, in terms of Britain, that maybe just feel they don't know enough about it, but, maybe America would be a country that they may want to go to more, or if they have political or previous sort of colonial experiences of some of the African countries with France, they may want to go to France rather than come to Britain. And maybe if they speak the language, if you don't speak English, some people may actually decide, you know what, I can't speak English, so go to a country where actually they could speak the language.
Yes, people might ask, why is it that the numbers of people applying for refugee status in the UK are falling? And anybody who wants to know can, of course, find the information on the Home Office website so they can see for themselves what the figures are. So why are the numbers dropping? Of course, the reasons why a person might travel to another country to seek sanctuary from persecution will vary according to each individual person. And so there's no single reason. It can be that to some extent the total number of people seeking refuge around the world will change from year to year, and the general trend in the UK reflects that. But there are some specific reasons why people might no longer be able to reach the UK. In particular, traditionally, if we think about border controls, what we're imagining is somebody in a uniform, maybe standing at passport control as an airport or a ferry port, who's checking people's passports as they enter the UK. Somebody who's checking that people have a right to enter. But what we're seeing increasingly in recent years is that the UK's border controls are something that you will meet before you leave another country, before you catch your flight to the UK, before you catch the train or the ferry. You'll already have had your status checked. And of course that system has certain benefits for the UK. The idea is that we can prevent somebody who doesn't have a right to enter the UK from engaging in a journey. But that system can also impose risks for people who are trying to escape persecution. Why might those risks be experienced by people who are refugees? Because if a policy, in its effect, simply reduces the number of people who can reach the UK from other countries, and if that policy doesn't distinguish as well as it might do between people who are fleeing persecution and people who aren't, then people might not be able to reach sanctuary from persecution. Just to give you a couple of examples. If you imagine a situation when you're in one of the country's most dangerous areas in the world, and you are in danger from the authorities in your country, maybe you have only a short time to get together just a few things to take with you on a journey to a safe place. One of the questions I often ask the students is, what would you take? And in particular, would you take your passport? And people naturally might say, well, of course, if I'm going on a journey to another country, I'd always take my passport. I'll need to show that to be able to travel. But then we encourage people to think a bit more deeply about that. If you are in danger from the authorities, from people in uniform in the country that you're trying to leave, are you going to want to show those people in uniform your passport, which identifies you, if that will confirm to them that you're somebody they want to detain, somebody they want to persecute? So carrying your own passport might be something that we'd normally think, of course I'd take that with me. But of course, if you're a refugee, that could be something that exposes you to danger. So somebody then might, for genuine reasons, need to use false papers or to try and travel without using papers to reach a safe place. And of course, for understandable reasons, the UK has laws and policies designed to prevent people travelling in that way. And so, for example, if I try to board a flight to the UK, or a ferry or a train, then there'll be somebody working for the airline or the ferry company or the train company who will be looking at my papers to see, are they genuine or not? Do I have evidence of who I am that they can rely on? But of course, if I'm an employee for an airline or a ferry or a train company, I'm not an expert on who is a refugee. I'm not really equipped to work out who's really in danger. My job is simply to work out who's got authentic papers and who doesn't, who's carrying a real passport and who's carrying the fake. And so if our policies achieve a reduction in people entering the UK without the proper papers, then of course, yes, we will reduce the numbers of people coming to the UK who don't have a genuine reason to be here. Yes, that will be the case. But we may also prevent people from escaping a situation where they'd face real danger.
One of the arguments that people who oppose the presence of asylum seekers in the UK, one of the arguments that they use is that for most asylum seekers, the UK is not the first safe country, so the UK should not allow those asylum seekers to claim asylum here.
Okay.
How would you respond to that?
Well, the UK can actually, unless somebody discloses that this country isn't their first safe country, they can't prevent that, them from claiming asylum. But actually, if you are, people will come to Britain in the same way that they won't come to Britain for a variety of reasons, they will come to Britain for a variety of reasons. So they may speak the language, they may speak English, and they may have learned about Britain in the UK at school, when they were at school, or if it was sort of linked, back to the old, British Empire, so that they feel that maybe that they have an affiliation with Britain, and rather than somewhere like Italy or Greece or France or Spain, who actually they don't really know a lot about. And also I would say that, people think that actually that they believe in British justice, and they see that, people, I'm not so sure with David Cameron, but certainly, in the past, people have said to me, that they'd seen Tony Blair on TV and they'd liked him, and they thought that, that somebody like Tony Blair could actually protect them and look after them, and actually see Britain as a just and fair society where everybody is treated equally. So they may be drawn to that as well. And I perfectly understand that, because, an individual that has grown up in potentially a very corrupt country, where justice was not seen to be done, and living under a dictatorship, it would be natural for them actually to want, to feel, if they don't feel safe there, that the opposite of all of that would be someone that they actually would feel safe, so they would want to come here.
Yes, people often ask, why don't people find a safe refuge that's nearer their home? And if you look at the evidence, for example, on the website of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, what you find, in fact, is that the vast majority of people who leave a place of danger to seek refuge do, in fact, travel a relatively short distance. So if you look at the countries that receive the largest number of refugees in the world, they're generally not countries like the United Kingdom. In fact, what we find is that they're people who've travelled from a dangerous country simply to a country just across a border, and they're often living in a refugee camp in very basic conditions. So in most cases, in fact, that's what happens. Only a tiny minority of the world's refugees reach the UK. And the UK does have a policy which says that if a person applies for refugee status here, if they've spent any significant time in a safe country on the way, the UK will expect that person to have applied for refugee status in that safe country. Why then might people come to the UK, we might ask? You know, why is it they come here? Why not to somewhere that's on the way, somewhere nearer home? Well, of course, there could be all kinds of reasons why people might go to a safe country or try to reach a certain country to reach safety. If I was having to leave the country where I live, I might think about how would I make a fresh start in the country that I'm travelling to? What would I need? Maybe I'd need to be in a country where I speak the language. So, for example, if I live in a country that was a former British colony, then I may have the advantage if I come to the UK that I do speak English. So if I'm a teacher, for example, or a nurse, if I'm able to work, which of course people who apply for refugee status generally aren't, but if I am able to work, then I'd be in a better position once my claim for refuge from persecution has been recognised to start a new life. At least for a period of time until the situation in my country improves and I can then return to where I started.
Would you say the UK has an obligation towards asylum seekers?
Oh, absolutely. Under the UN Convention of 1951, which was passed after the Second World War because of issues around refugees fleeing across Europe because of the growing power, for example, of Nazi Germany, the UN then, the 1951 Convention was passed where people are able to and entitled to be able to go to other countries and claim asylum and then become refugees. So in a sense that is the framework for the whole asylum system in this country today.
The UK, like a number of countries, like most countries in the world, is a party to a major United Nations treaty, which means that we've promised not to return refugees to a place that would be dangerous for them. And of course, one possible impact of the policies that the UK has adopted is that while we're reducing the total number of people reaching the UK from other countries, we may also be reducing the number of people escaping from danger. And so there could be genuine harm experienced by people.
Well, I think the fundamental has got to be a recognition of their common humanity, that they are deserving of treatment that is dignified, that is humane, and that is effective and efficient. Too often it has not recognised that we are dealing with human beings, and often, far too often, human beings who have suffered dreadful circumstances before arriving here, and that of course it's legitimate for any country to expect to ask those who are seeking asylum questions about their circumstances and about their background before assessing whether or not they're entitled to asylum. But that must be done in a way that does recognise that they have often suffered very considerably and must not be expected to suffer as part of the process of asking the legitimate questions that need to be asked about their circumstances and about their claim.
The UK has also been enforcing returns to countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's talk of enforcing returns to Zimbabwe.
Yes.
How do you...
It's incredible to think that they would do that. I mean, they did talk about enforcing returns to Zimbabwe like a little while back, but there's been nothing since. And very often, you know, government will actually sort of say something, just see how people react, but actually really they don't have much intention of doing it. But it seems incredible to me because, you know, you just have to turn on the TV or, you know, read the sort of quality newspapers to know what the situation is in those particular countries. I mean, in Iraq, you know, okay, I know at the moment that, you know, what's happening in Tunisia, you know, what's happening in Egypt and what's happening in Libya has taken Iraq off the headlines of the news in terms of the violence, but it's still going on. People are still being killed. So Iraq, as we can say the very fact that the British and American troops are there, it isn't a safe country. Afghanistan, is the same. The DRC is not safe, particularly for women, and Zimbabwe, of course, is not safe. So it just seems quite incredible that there would even be contemplated that actually an individual would be returned back to those countries. And of course, I mean, it is, the infrastructure in certain areas of those countries is of a nature that you actually cannot maintain contacts with individuals and with people when they're actually there.
No, I mean, of course, people ought not to be required to return to situations where their well-being, in some cases their life, will be put at risk. And I think it is vitally important that any government policy on this respects that danger, recognises the risk that would be run by anybody who was returned to those situations, and make sure that they are able to stay in the UK till it is safe for them to return and to contribute positively while they're here.
What I encourage anybody thinking about that to ask themselves is, what's been the news from the countries that you've mentioned? What might be the real risks that people may face if they're returned? It may come as a surprise to many people that our policy is to return people to some countries where people would face very real dangers. As I've discussed, there can be a number of reasons why people might not be recognised as a refugee because of a lack of evidence. Many people in the UK, even if they had evidence in their country of origin to bring, may not have been able to bring that evidence with them because it would be a real source of danger if they were caught carrying that evidence travelling to the UK. So all they can do is talk about what they've experienced and the dangers that they face. And if they're not believed, then they may face a real risk of being returned to a country where their rights would not be protected. And so, yes, there are real dangers in these situations. And of course, it's essential that the authorities look at everybody's case in terms of the actual danger that that person would face if they're returned. I'm not simply saying that everybody who doesn't qualify for the legal definition of refugee be returned to a particular country.
In your opinion, is there anything that needs to be done to improve the way this country deals with asylum seekers?
Yeah. I would say that, it's vitally important that decisions are made, the right decision is made first time. In my experience, the Refugee Action's experience, we have a lot of people who've been turned down for asylum and who feel that they actually got the wrong decision, and that maybe that it wasn't the merit in the case that ensured that they got a negative decision. It was the fact that an inadequate interpreter, potentially there was admin errors, the solicitor didn't represent them properly, the solicitor wanted to wait and put forward all the substantive evidence at the appeal stage, which just seems incredible. So very, very important that the front end of the system is loaded with as much advice and support as possible, and people are given the opportunity to explore all of the options and actually get their actual case together adequately, and that the right decision is made first time. Because I think if that is a negative decision, the people actually will accept it more. And if they are then shown why, well, this is the reasons you don't meet the UN Convention of 1951, they'll be more accepting of that, rather than actually feeling they haven't been heard and then they just can't accept it. And then they go into Section 4 support, or they go into the cycle of destitution, and just creates huge problems. I think Section 4 needs revisiting. I think the idea of the Section 4 payment card in particular, because it excludes so many people from being able to access travel, and it actually takes a lot of their sort of their basic rights really away from them, about the fact that if they need to, have a haircut or go get a bus somewhere, it is just like too restricting. I think the issue of destitution really is very, very dangerous and actually needs to be resolved very, very quickly. And I would like to see an asylum system where the individual, the asylum seeker themselves, they take control and they feel empowered, and aren't at the mercy of whether it be poor legal advice or immigration officials or caseworkers who potentially have a huge caseload and aren't giving them their full attention and not considering sort of all of the facts. So there are lots of areas that things could be improved on, but I do believe that the UKBA have got, they have an asylum improvement programme, they are looking to make changes. And I hope that they will, and that they will be positive changes, and it will be positive for the huge number of individuals that are in the asylum system and actually will be in the asylum system in years to come.
I don't know, I think all governments tend to react, to overreact to the way in which the plight of asylum seekers and the picture of asylum seekers they get from the popular media, particularly the press, and that has often made me very angry indeed, because asylum seekers don't need the policies, with government policies with regard to the way they're treated, dictated by the prejudices of the popular figure tabloid press. What they need is a properly balanced approach that recognises their plight, at the same time recognises that they, of course, if they're seeking asylum, ought to expect to be able to explain the situation and why they're seeking asylum, but does overall treat them both efficiently and humanely. And I have to say that the policies of successive governments have been neither efficient nor humane in the way in which they dealt with people seeking asylum in the UK.
There are serious questions about several areas of what we do now. There are questions to be asked about how the UK deters people from coming to the UK to seek refuge. Questions about how well our laws and policies distinguish between people who genuinely would be in danger if they were sent back and people who aren't. There are questions about how we treat people when they arrive. I think most people will have heard about the detention and removal centres that we use in the UK. And people might imagine that when people are living behind barbed wire and behind locked doors, that they must have committed a crime. They must be at least suspected of some kind of offence against our law. In practice, what we find is that people, including children, are still detained behind locked doors and behind barbed wire, even if they're not suspected of committing any crime, even if from the moment when they arrive in the UK they do everything that British authorities ask them to do, they can still be put in a detention centre. Their freedom can still be taken away. So the process of arrival, how we treat people when they arrive, the legacy cases of people who can be stuck for years in limbo, not knowing what their future will be, unable to work and unable to access state support. And of course, the UK authorities are doing some work to try and improve the situation, to make decisions more quickly, and to try and reduce the legacy cases, to reduce the numbers of people still waiting for years, not knowing what their future will be. But those problems still remain, and so there's plenty more work to be done.